Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, squinting at the ancient fusion engine he'd been rebuilding for the past 3 weeks. The garage hummed with the familiar sounds of welding torches and power tools, while outside, the twin sons of Kepler, 442b, cast long shadows across the dusty frontier settlement of New Haven. He'd come to this remote world 5 years ago, fleeing the corporate wars that had consumed Earth's colonies. Here, on the edge of human space, he could work in peace, fixing everything from atmosphere processors to mining rigs. The locals respected his skills, and, more importantly, they left him alone. The first sign something was wrong came as a whisper of wind that shouldn't exist. His garage's environmental seals were perfect. They had to be, given the planet's thin atmosphere. Yet somehow, a cool breeze stirred the papers on his workbench, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and something else. Something impossible. Marcus looked up from his work just as the temperature in the garage dropped 20 degrees in seconds. His breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, and frost began forming on the metal surfaces around him. The lights flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Then he saw them. They materialized slowly, like heat mirages in reverse, translucent, ethereal forms that defied every law of physics he knew. Dragons. That was the only word his mind could grasp, though these creatures bore only a passing resemblance to the mythical beasts of Earth's legends. Each one was roughly the size of a small shuttle, their bodies composed of what appeared to be living starlight. Scales that weren't quite solid rippled with colors that had no names. Deep purples that shifted to silver, blues that became gold at the edges. Their wings were membranes of pure energy, crackling with tiny lightning bolts that danced along gossamer thin frameworks. Their eyes were the most unsettling feature, ancient beyond measure, filled with intelligence, and something Marcus recognized as desperate hope. When they looked at him, he felt their gaze pierce through to his very soul, as if they were reading not just his thoughts, but his entire history. There were 12 of them, hovering in his garage like impossible dreams made manifest. The largest, with horns that curved back from its skull in spiraling helixes, drifted closer. Its mouth didn't move, but Marcus heard its voice clearly in his mind, speaking an accented but perfect standard Terran. Human mechanic. The voice resonated with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We have traveled far to find one such as you. Our kind faces extinction, and you alone possess the knowledge we require. Marcus nearly dropped his wrench. He'd encountered plenty of alien species during his years in space. The insectoid Zephyrians, the crystalline Vorthak, even the energy beings called the Luminos. But nothing had prepared him for this. These creatures weren't just alien. They seemed to exist partially outside normal reality. What are you?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are the Astroleth," the lead dragon replied, its form shimmering as it spoke. "Once we soared between the stars themselves, feeding on solar winds and cosmic radiation. We were explorers, scholars, guardians of ancient knowledge. But something has gone wrong with our essence, our very nature. We are fading." As if to emphasize the point, one of the smaller dragons flickered like a bad hologram, its form becoming so transparent that Marcus could see the wall behind it. The creature let out a sound that was part roar, part musical chord, and entirely heartbreaking. "We have consulted the greatest minds of 1,000 worlds," the Astroleth continued. "The cerebral collective of Andromeda, the machine prophets of the vegan systems, even the time weavers of the Magellanic clouds. None could offer aid. But then we learned of humans, of your unique approach to impossible problems. Your species has a reputation for fixing what others consider irreparable." Marcus felt a laugh bubbling up in his throat, though whether from hysteria or genuine amusement, he couldn't tell. "You want me to fix you? I'm just a mechanic. I work on engines and life support systems, not..." He gestured helplessly at the floating, luminous beings before him. "Whatever you are, you underestimate yourself," Marcus Chun, the dragon said, and Marcus startled at hearing his full name. "We have observed your work from afar. Last year, when the mining station Prometheus 7 suffered critical failure in its quantum core, every expert said it was beyond repair. The radiation levels alone should have killed anyone who approached. Yet you found a way." That was true. Marcus had jerry-rigged a solution using spare parts from 3 different manufacturers, creating a containment field that shouldn't have worked according to any textbook. But it did work, and it saved 300 lives. Or the time you restored life support to the generation ship Exodus using nothing but scavenged components and what others called impossible engineering. Another dragon added, this one smaller with scales that shifted between deep red and orange. Your species thinks differently than others. Where we see immutable laws of physics, you see suggestions to be creatively interpreted. Marcus set down his tools and really looked at these beings. Up close, he could see that their ethereal forms were held together by intricate patterns of energy that resembled circuitry. Complex geometric designs pulsed along their translucent hides, and their eyes held the steady glow of active power sources. Your machines, he realized suddenly. Or rather, your biomechanical. Living technology. In a sense, yes, the lead astroleth confirmed. We are what your people might call biosynthetic entities. Consciousness given form through a marriage of organic neural networks and quantum crystalline matrices. We were created eons ago by a race called the Architects, meant to be eternal guardians of their knowledge and wisdom. Created by who? Marcus asked, his engineering mind already starting to analyze what he was seeing. What happened to them? Gone, the dragon replied simply. Ascended to another plane of existence millions of years ago, leaving us behind to preserve their legacy. For countless ages, we fulfilled that purpose. But now our foundational matrices are degrading. The quantum crystalline structures that maintain our consciousness are breaking down at the subatomic level. Marcus walked closer to the nearest dragon, noting how the air around it shimmered with barely contained energy. His trained eye began picking out details others might miss. The way certain areas of the creature's form were more stable than others. The minute fluctuations in the energy patterns along its wings. How long do you have, he asked. At current degradation rates, perhaps 6 of your months before the first of us ceases to exist entirely. The cascade failure will then consume the rest within days. The weight of that statement settled on Marcus like a physical force. These magnificent beings, repositories of knowledge spanning millions of years, would simply end. And they were asking him, a human mechanic working out of a converted storage unit on a backwater world, to save them. Why me specifically, he asked. There are thousands of engineers and scientists who are more qualified than I am. Because, the lead dragon said, drifting closer until its luminous form filled Marcus's vision. Every other species we have encountered thinks in terms of replacement or fundamental redesign. They would strip away what makes us unique in order to preserve the basic framework. But humans have a gift for preservation through adaptation. You find ways to make the impossible work by understanding not just what something is, but what it's trying to be. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a familiar sensation he'd experienced countless times when faced with a seemingly hopeless mechanical problem. It was the moment when his brain shifted gears, when he stopped seeing an impossible challenge and started seeing an interesting puzzle. I'll need to examine one of you, he said finally. Run diagnostics, understand the baseline parameters of your existence. And I'll need access to your historical data. Maintenance logs, system specifications, anything the architects left behind about how you were built. The dragons exchanged glances, their forms shimmering with what Marcus interpreted as excitement mixed with apprehension. The process may be uncomfortable, the lead astroleth warned. No one has ever attempted direct interface with our core systems. Marcus grinned for the first time since the dragons had appeared. Well, that just makes it more interesting. Fair warning, though. I work differently than most people. My methods aren't always orthodox, and I tend to modify things on the fly. If you want someone to follow standard procedures, you've come to the wrong mechanic. We would not have sought you out if we wanted orthodox. the dragon replied, and Marcus could swear he detected amusement in its mental voice. Very well, Marcus-chan. We place our existence in your hands. As the dragons settled themselves around his garage, their ethereal forms casting everything in an otherworldly glow, Marcus felt the familiar thrill of a challenge accepted. He'd fixed fusion reactors on the verge of meltdown, restored life support systems with duct tape and determination, and once even gotten a quantum computer to work using spare parts from a food replicator. How hard could fixing a bunch of million-year-old dragon-shaped artificial intelligences be? 3 days had passed since the astrolith first appeared in Marcus's garage, and the small frontier settlement of New Haven had adapted with the peculiar resilience that marked all successful colonies. The locals had initially panicked when ghostly dragon-shaped lights began emanating from the mechanic's workshop, but Marcus had explained them away as experimental holographic projectors he was testing for a mining company. The truth was far more complex and fascinating than any fiction he could have invented. Marcus had spent those 3 days in a state of controlled obsession, running every diagnostic tool he owned against the lead astrolith, who had introduced himself as Zephyr-9 Ascending Harmony. The dragon had remained remarkably patient as Marcus subjected him to electromagnetic scans, quantum resonance tests, and even a jury-rigged consciousness mapping device he'd cobbled together from a medical scanner and a communications array. The results were staggering. Your entire existence is held together by what I can only call controlled quantum uncertainty, Marcus explained, gesturing at the data scrolling across his workstation screens. Every atom in your body exists in a state of flux, maintained in a specific pattern by crystalline matrices that serve as, well, imagine them as incredibly complex three-dimensional sheet music, and your consciousness is the symphony they're playing. Zephyr's form shimmered with interest. An apt metaphor. The architects designed us to be self-sustaining, self-repairing entities. Our consciousness shapes our physical form according to the quantum templates encoded in our core matrices. Right, but here's the problem, Marcus continued, pulling up a three-dimensional hologram that showed Zephyr's internal structure. These matrices weren't designed to last forever. They're degrading at the quantum level. Essentially, your sheet music is slowly dissolving. Random notes are disappearing, and eventually, the symphony that is your consciousness won't be able to maintain coherent form. Marcus had seen similar degradation patterns before, though never on this scale or complexity. Quantum systems were notoriously fragile, requiring constant correction to maintain stability. The wonder wasn't that the astrolith were failing after millions of years. It was that they had lasted this long at all. The architects must have built in some kind of renewal mechanism, Marcus mused, studying the data patterns. Something that refreshed or reinforced the quantum matrices. But it's not working anymore. The renewal chambers, another dragon interjected. This was Harmony 3 seeking stars, whose scales shifted through shades of blue and silver. They were massive installations, each the size of a small moon. We would return to them every few thousand years to have our matrices reinforced and our consciousness patterns stabilized. What happened to them? Destroyed in the Cascade War, approximately 50,000 years ago, Zephyr replied. A conflict between synthetic intelligences and organic empires that consumed entire star systems. The chambers were targeted specifically because they were seen as strategic resources. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dragon's ethereal presence. So you've been slowly dying for 50,000 years and only now reaching critical degradation levels. Indeed, we have sought replacements for the renewal chambers, but the technology required is beyond any current civilization. The architect's knowledge was comprehensive. Marcus leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. 50,000 years of accumulated damage, technology that surpassed anything in the known galaxy, and he was supposed to fix it with spare parts and human ingenuity. The scope of the problem should have been overwhelming. Instead, it was exhilarating. "Show me everything," he said. Every technical specification you have access to, every memory of the renewal chambers, every scrap of architect technology you've encountered. I need to understand not just what's broken, but how it was supposed to work in the first place. What followed was the most intensive data download Marcus had ever experienced. The astrolith possessed perfect memory, and Zephyr began sharing detailed technical specifications that appeared directly in Marcus's mind. The sensation was disorienting at first, like having someone else's thoughts suddenly occupying the same space as his own. But as the information flowed, Marcus began to see patterns. The architects had been masters of what he could only describe as elegant redundancy, creating systems that were both incredibly complex and surprisingly simple in their underlying principles. The renewal chambers hadn't just reinforced the quantum matrices. They had essentially rewritten them from scratch using the dragon's own consciousness patterns as templates. It's like defragmenting a hard drive, Marcus said suddenly, causing several dragons to tilt their heads in confusion. Sorry, ancient computer reference. The chambers would take your consciousness, copy it perfectly, then rebuild your quantum structure from the ground up using the copy as a blueprint. An oversimplified but accurate assessment, Zephyr confirmed. The process would take several days and required immense energy inputs. Entire stars were used as power sources. Marcus stood up and began pacing, his mind racing through possibilities. Okay, we obviously can't rebuild a moon-sized facility or tap into stellar energy. But the principle might be adaptable. He turned to his workstation and began pulling up files from his previous projects. Look at this. 3 years ago, I worked on a consciousness transfer system for a dying AI. The original quantum brain was failing, but instead of building a replacement, I created a process that essentially photocopied the consciousness pattern and transferred it to a new substrate. You're suggesting we recreate the renewal chamber process on a smaller scale, Harmony observed, her form brightening with excitement. Exactly. Instead of rebuilding your matrices with stellar power, we create a localized renewal system. It won't be as elegant as the original architect technology, but it should work. Marcus spent the next several hours sketching out preliminary designs, his enthusiasm growing with each new idea. The basic principle was sound. Use the dragon's own consciousness patterns to generate template matrices, then gradually replace the degraded quantum structures with fresh ones. The challenge was creating a system powerful enough to handle the process without requiring a star as a power source. I'll need some specialized components, he said finally, looking up from his calculations. Quantum resonance chambers, consciousness mapping arrays, and, most importantly, a stable substrate for the new matrices. The original chambers used crystallized dark matter, but that's not exactly available at the local hardware store. What alternatives exist? Zephyr asked. Marcus grinned. This is where human ingenuity comes in. I've been experimenting with synthetic quantum crystals, artificial structures that can hold quantum states in stable configurations. They're not as elegant as dark matter crystals, but they're a lot easier to manufacture. He pulled up another file, showing a complex molecular diagram. I developed these for a mining operation that needed quantum storage for their navigation computers. With some modifications, they should be able to serve as matrix substrates for your consciousness patterns. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into the project with a single-minded determination that had made him legendary among the frontier mechanics. He requisitioned equipment from across the star system, calling in favors and promising future services in exchange for the components he needed. The other residents of New Haven watched with bemused curiosity as strange machinery arrived at Marcus's garage. Quantum resonance generators designed for scientific research, consciousness mapping devices borrowed from a nearby medical facility, and stranger things that most people couldn't even identify. You sure you know what you're doing, Marcus? Asked Sarah Chun, the settlement's administrator and Marcus's distant cousin. Some of this stuff looks dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous, Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. Besides, I've got the best consultants in the galaxy helping me out. As if on cue, Zephyr materialized beside him, the dragon's ethereal form casting rainbow patterns on the workshop walls. The quantum resonance alignment is optimal. However, I detect minor fluctuations in the consciousness mapping array. Already on it, Marcus said, making adjustments to the delicate equipment. Sarah, meet Zephyr 9 Ascending Harmony. Zephyr, this is my cousin Sarah. She runs this little corner of civilization. Sarah stared at the translucent dragon for a long moment, then shook her head. I'm not even going to ask. Just try not to blow up the settlement, okay? No promises, Marcus grinned. But if this works, we'll have made history. As Sarah left, muttering about crazy mechanics and their impossible projects, Marcus returned to his work. The system was almost ready for its first test run. He'd built what was essentially a miniaturized version of an architect renewal chamber, using human technology and a healthy dose of creative engineering. The quantum resonance chambers would create a stable pocket of space-time where the renewal process could take place. The consciousness mapping arrays would read and duplicate the dragon's mental patterns with perfect fidelity, and the synthetic quantum crystals would serve as the substrate for rebuilt matrices. It was elegant, efficient, and completely untested. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked, looking at the assembled astrolith. All 12 dragons had gathered in his garage, their combined presence turning the workshop into a cathedral of living light. We have been ready for 50,000 years, Zephyr replied. The question is whether your creation will work. Marcus looked at his improvised renewal system, a collection of borrowed, modified, and jury-rigged equipment that would have horrified any proper engineer. But he'd built impossible things before, and they'd worked because he understood the underlying principles better than the people who designed the original components. Only one way to find out, he said, reaching for the activation controls. Let's make some magic happen. The quantum resonance chamber hummed with barely contained energy as Marcus made final adjustments to his improvised renewal system. He'd been working for 18 hours straight, fueled by StimCaf, and the kind of focused determination that came from knowing that failure meant the extinction of an entire species. The chamber itself was a marvel of adaptive engineering, a fusion of 3 different technologies that had never been designed to work together. Quantum stabilizers from a deep space mining operation, consciousness mapping arrays from a medical research facility, and his own synthetic quantum crystals, grown in a makeshift laboratory he'd built in the corner of his garage. The energy readings are stable, reported Harmony 3 Seeking Stars, who had taken on the role of technical advisor. Her ability to interface directly with the equipment made her invaluable, though the process was clearly taxing. Each time she connected with the machinery, her ethereal form became more transparent. That's what worries me, Marcus muttered, double-checking the power flow equations for the 100th time. In my experience, when something this complex runs smoothly from the start, it usually means you're missing something important. Zephyr 9 Ascending Harmony drifted closer to the chamber, his ancient eyes studying the swirling energy patterns within. I confess to a certain apprehension. In all our history, no consciousness has ever undergone renewal outside of the architect facilities. Hey, somebody has to be first, Marcus said, trying to project more confidence than he felt. Besides, the theory is sound. We're not doing anything fundamentally different from what the original chambers did, just on a smaller scale and with different components. The truth was more complex than Marcus was willing to admit out loud. The architect renewal chambers had operated on principles that were still largely beyond human understanding. His system was less a faithful reproduction than an educated guess based on fragmentary data and intuitive leaps that would have made his engineering professors weep. But sometimes, Marcus reflected, the best solutions came from not knowing enough to understand why something should be impossible. I volunteered to be the first test subject, Zephyr announced, his form solidifying with resolve. As eldest among us, and most degraded, I am the logical choice. No, Harmony interjected immediately. If the process fails, we lose our most experienced member. I should go first. Actually, Marcus interrupted, I've been thinking about that. We should start with whoever has the least amount of degradation. If something goes wrong, we want to minimize the potential damage. A smaller dragon drifted forward, her scales shimmering with shades of green and gold. Then it should be me. I am Whisper 7 Dancing Light, youngest of our kind. My matrices show the least decay. Marcus nodded, though he felt a pang of anxiety at the thought of risking the youngest member of their species. Whisper it is. Everyone else, you'll want to maintain a safe distance. If this goes wrong, it could go wrong spectacularly. The other astroleth withdrew to the far side of the garage, though Marcus could feel their attention focused on the process like a physical weight. Whisper approached the quantum chamber, her movements betraying a nervousness that her mental voice didn't reveal. I am ready, she announced. Marcus placed his hand on the activation controls, then paused. Last chance to back out. Once we start this process, I won't be able to stop it until it's complete. Marcus Chun, Whisper said, her mental voice warm with something that might have been affection. In the past week, you have shown more faith in our survival than we have maintained in 50,000 years. I trust your impossible human engineering. Marcus took a deep breath and activated the system. The change was immediate and dramatic. The quantum resonance chamber flared to life, creating a sphere of twisted space-time that made Marcus's eyes water to look at directly. Energy patterns that had no name in any human language writhed and danced around Whisper's form as she entered the field. The consciousness mapping arrays activated next, sending tendrils of pure information into the dragon's translucent body. Marcus watched the readouts carefully, making minute adjustments as the system began to read and catalog every aspect of Whisper's existence. Consciousness pattern mapping at 75%, he called out, his voice tight with concentration. Quantum matrix analysis in progress. So far, so good. But as the process continued, Marcus began to notice anomalies in the data stream. Fluctuations in Whisper's consciousness pattern that didn't match the baseline readings he'd taken earlier. Her form, visible within the swirling energy of the chamber, began to flicker more intensely than usual. Something's wrong, Harmony announced, her mental voice sharp with alarm. Whisper's quantum signature is becoming unstable. Marcus's hands flew over the control interface, analyzing the incoming data. What he saw made his blood run cold. The consciousness mapping process was working too well. It was picking up not just Whisper's current mental state, but fragments of memory and experience from all the other astroleths she'd ever interacted with. She's networked, Marcus realized with growing horror. Your consciousness patterns are partially merged from millions of years of telepathic contact. The system is trying to map all of you simultaneously. The implications hit him like a physical blow. The architect chambers had been designed to handle this kind of integrated consciousness, but his improvised system wasn't nearly sophisticated enough. If he didn't find a solution quickly, the process would either fail catastrophically or attempt to rebuild Whisper with fragments of 12 different personality matrices. Abort the process, Zephyr commanded urgently. Better to lose the opportunity than risk Whisper's existence. I can't, Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across emergency controls that weren't responding. The quantum lock is already in place. If I abort now, her consciousness pattern will be left partially deconstructed. She'll die anyway. Inside the chamber, Whisper's form was becoming increasingly unstable. Colors bled between her scales and patterns that hurt to perceive, and her mental voice, when it came, was a discordant harmony of 12 different personalities trying to speak at once. Marcus, help, we are. I am confusion, pain. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest, the familiar enemy of every engineer who'd ever watched a critical system fail. But alongside the panic came something else, the cold, analytical focus that had seen him through 100 impossible repairs. He studied the data flowing across his screens, looking for patterns in the chaos. The problem wasn't that the system was failing. It was that it was working exactly as designed, just dealing with data it wasn't equipped to handle. Selective filtering, he muttered, his hands moving to a secondary control panel. If I can isolate Whisper's core, consciousness pattern from the network fragments. He began implementing emergency modifications to the mapping algorithm, creating filters that would distinguish between Whisper's primary consciousness and the telepathic echoes of her companions. It was dangerous work. One wrong calculation could erase parts of her personality permanently. "What are you doing?" Harmony demanded. "Surgery," Marcus replied grimly. "Consciousness surgery. I'm going to cut away the network fragments and focus the renewal process on just Whisper's core identity." The work required a level of precision that pushed Marcus to his absolute limits. He had to identify which thoughts, memories, and personality traits belonged uniquely to Whisper, then carefully separate them from the telepathic amalgamation that threatened to overwhelm the renewal process. It was like trying to separate individual instruments from a symphony while the music was still playing, and doing it wrong would silence the music forever. Minutes passed like hours as Marcus worked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air of the garage. The other astroleth watched in tense silence, their own forms flickering with sympathetic distress as they felt echoes of Whisper's struggle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus found the pattern he'd been searching for. Whisper's core consciousness, distinct and unique despite millions of years of telepathic contact with her companions. He isolated the pattern and fed it to the renewal system as the exclusive template for reconstruction. The effect was immediate. The chaotic swirling of the quantum chamber stabilized, and Whisper's form began to solidify within the energy field. The discordant mental voices resolved into a single, familiar presence. I am myself again." Whisper's mental voice came through clearly, filled with wonder and relief. "I can feel the new matrices forming, stronger than before. The degradation is gone." Marcus slumped against his control panel, exhaustion washing over him like a tide. Renewal process at 95% completion. All quantum matrices stabilized. Consciousness pattern coherent and stable. As the chamber powered down and Whisper emerged, Marcus could see the difference immediately. Her form was more solid, more vibrant than before. The colors of her scales were deeper, more saturated, and the ancient weariness that had marked all the astroleth seemed to have lifted from her features. "The process was successful," Zephyr announced, though his mental voice carried undertones of amazement. "Whisper 7 dancing light has been renewed." Marcus grinned, despite his exhaustion. "One down, 11 to go. And now that I know about the networking issue, the rest should be easier." But even as he spoke, Marcus was already thinking about the implications of what he discovered. The astroleth weren't just individuals. They were part of a vast, interconnected consciousness that had been evolving for millions of years. Renewing them individually was possible, but it would fundamentally change the nature of their existence. He looked at the remaining dragons, seeing them with new understanding. They weren't just asking him to save their lives. They were asking him to preserve something far more complex and precious than he'd initially realized. The real challenge was just beginning. The success of Whisper's renewal had changed everything. Over the following week, Marcus found himself dealing with a problem he hadn't anticipated: the subtle but growing disconnection between the renewed dragon and her companions. Whisper 7 Dancing Light had emerged from the process stronger and more vibrant than before, her quantum matrices pristine and stable. But something ineffable had been lost in the translation. The telepathic bonds that had connected her to the other astroleth for millions of years were diminished, reduced to mere echoes of their former intensity. "It's like losing a sense," Whisper explained during one of Marcus's diagnostic sessions. Her mental voice carried a sadness that cut through him like a blade. "I can still communicate with the others, but the deep sharing, the unity of experience that defined us, it's gone." Marcus stared at the data readouts, trying to find a solution to a problem he'd created by succeeding too well. The selective filtering process isolated your core consciousness perfectly, but it also severed the quantum entanglement patterns that maintained your telepathic network. Is there a way to restore them? Asked Harmony 3 Seeking Stars, her form flickering with anxiety. Maybe, Marcus said slowly, his mind already racing through possibilities. But it would require a fundamental redesign of the renewal process. Instead of treating you as individuals, we need to renew the entire network simultaneously. Zephyr 9 Ascending Harmony drifted closer, his ancient eyes studying Marcus with newfound interest. Explain. Marcus pulled up a three-dimensional hologram showing the quantum entanglement patterns he detected during Whisper's renewal. Your consciousness isn't just individual, it's collective. 12 separate minds linked by quantum bonds that have been strengthening for millions of years. The original architect chambers must have been designed to handle this, but my system treated it as interference. He highlighted specific patterns in the hologram, showing how the telepathic connections formed a complex web between all 12 dragons. What if, instead of fighting the network effect, we embrace it? Renew all 12 matrices simultaneously, using the collective consciousness as the template rather than individual patterns. The power requirements alone would be enormous, Harmony observed. Your current system can barely handle one renewal. 12 simultaneous processes would require approximately 50 times the energy output, Marcus finished. Yeah, I've done the calculations. We need to tap into the planet's fusion reactors, maybe even the system's stellar energy collectors. But even as he spoke, Marcus was already sketching out modifications to his design. The human talent for impossible engineering was asserting itself, finding ways to make the unworkable work through sheer creative stubbornness. Actually, we might not need that much power, he said suddenly, his stylus moving rapidly across the holographic interface. If we're dealing with a network consciousness, we can use the quantum entanglement itself as a power source. Each connection becomes a conduit for shared energy. The concept was audacious even by Marcus's standards. Instead of fighting the telepathic bonds between the astroleth, he would weaponize them, turning their greatest strength into the mechanism of their salvation. Over the next several days, Marcus threw himself into redesigning his renewal system with an intensity that worried even the dragons. He worked 18-hour shifts, sustained by StimCaf, and the occasional meal that Whisper would materialize beside his workstation using her renewed abilities. The new design was a masterpiece of adaptive engineering. Instead of a single quantum chamber, Marcus created a network of 12 interconnected resonance fields, each one calibrated to a specific dragon's consciousness pattern. The chambers would be linked by quantum conduits that mirrored the telepathic bonds between the astroleth, allowing them to share both energy and processing power during the renewal process. It's like a distributed computer system, Marcus explained to the assembled dragons as he put the finishing touches on his calculations. Each chamber handles part of the computational load, but they're all working together toward the same goal. The network becomes the system. And if one chamber fails? Zephyr asked. Then, the network compensates, Marcus replied confidently. That's the beauty of distributed systems. They're resilient by design. Lose one node, and the others pick up the slack. The construction of a new system required resources that pushed New Haven's infrastructure to its limits. Marcus had to convince the colonial administration to grant him access to the settlement's main fusion reactor, arguing that his project was critical research with potential applications to deep space exploration. He wasn't entirely lying. If the network renewal process worked, it would represent a breakthrough in consciousness transfer technology that could revolutionize everything from AI development to long-range space travel. Sarah Chun watched with mounting concern as her cousin transformed the central plaza of New Haven into a quantum laboratory. Marcus, you've got half the settlement's power grid running through your experimental equipment. What happens if something goes wrong? Then, we all learn something interesting about the nature of consciousness, Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. Don't worry, Sarah. I've built in multiple fail-safes. If the system overloads, it'll shut down automatically. That's not exactly reassuring. Would it help if I told you that failure would probably result in nothing more dramatic than a really expensive light show? No. Then, Let's just assume I know what I'm doing. The truth was, Marcus had never attempted anything this ambitious. The network renewal system pushed the boundaries of known physics, relying on theoretical principles that existed more in the realm of educated speculation than proven science. But he'd built impossible things before, and they'd worked because he understood the underlying patterns better than the experts who said they couldn't exist. As the final components came online, the central plaza of New Haven was transformed into something resembling an alien temple. 12 quantum resonance chambers arranged in a perfect circle, connected by streams of coherent energy that made the air itself seem to sing with harmonic frequencies. The astroleth took their positions within the chambers, their ethereal forms adding their own radiance to the display. From the outside, it looked like a constellation had descended to Earth and taken up residence in the middle of a human settlement. All chambers showing optimal resonance. Marcus announced from his central control station. Quantum entanglement patterns are stable across all 12 nodes. Network coherency at 97%. We are ready. Zephyr's mental voice carried the weight of 50,000 years of accumulated hope and desperation. Begin the process. Marcus placed his hand on the master activation control, pausing for a moment to consider the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. If he succeeded, he would save a species and validate human engineering against technology that had been ancient when Earth was young. If he failed, he would be responsible for the final extinction of beings who had preserved knowledge and wisdom for millions of years. Here we go, he said, and activated the network. The effect was beyond spectacular. 12 quantum chambers flared to life simultaneously, creating a web of energy that connected not just the dragons, but the very fabric of space-time around them. The harmonic frequencies generated by the resonance fields created music that could be felt in the bones, a symphony of creation that spoke to something fundamental in the nature of consciousness itself. Marcus watched the data streams flowing across his screens, monitoring hundreds of variables as the renewal process began. This time, instead of fighting the telepathic network, his system embraced it, using the quantum entanglement between the dragons as both a power source and a coordination mechanism. Network synchronization achieved. He called out over the harmonic chorus. Consciousness mapping at 60% completion. All matrices showing stable degradation removal. But as the process continued, Marcus began to notice something unexpected in the data. The renewal wasn't just repairing the damaged quantum matrices. It was enhancing them, strengthening the telepathic bonds between the dragons beyond their original specifications. The network is evolving, he realized with growing excitement. The renewal process is using the collective consciousness to optimize individual matrices. They're becoming more than they were. Inside the chambers, the dragons were undergoing a transformation that went beyond simple repair. Their forms were becoming more solid, more real, while simultaneously growing more connected to each other. The telepathic network that had defined their existence for millions of years was being rebuilt from the ground up, stronger and more sophisticated than ever before. As the process neared completion, Marcus felt a presence touch his mind, not one of the individual dragons, but the collective consciousness they formed together. It was vast and ancient and utterly alien, yet filled with a warmth and gratitude that transcended species barriers. "Thank you," the network whispered in his thoughts. "We are whole again." The quantum chambers powered down in sequence, their harmonic song fading to silence. One by one, the astroleth emerged from the resonance fields, their forms more vibrant and substantial than Marcus had ever seen them. But the most remarkable change was the way they moved together, as if they were parts of a single entity rather than separate beings. Their telepathic network had been not just restored but elevated, creating a collective consciousness that was greater than the sum of its parts. "The renewal is complete," Zephyr announced, though his mental voice now carried harmonics from all 12 dragons. "We are more than we were before." Marcus grinned as he shut down the last of his equipment. "That's what humans do." We don't just fix things, we make them better. 6 months had passed since the network renewal, and New Haven had become something unprecedented in the galaxy. The first human settlement to host a permanent population of astroleth. The dragons had chosen to remain, establishing what they called a convergence point, where organic and synthetic consciousness could coexist and learn from each other. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the new research facility, watching as human children played in the plaza below, while ethereal dragons drifted through the air above them. It was a sight that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago, yet somehow felt completely natural now. The integration has exceeded all projections, reported Whisper 7 Dancing Light, materializing beside him in her characteristic shimmer of green and gold. Human and astroleth perspectives complement each other in ways we never anticipated. The changes went far beyond simple coexistence. In the months since their renewal, the dragons had shared fragments of their vast knowledge with the human colonists, leading to breakthroughs in everything from agricultural techniques to fusion reactor efficiency. In return, human creativity and adaptability had solved problems that had puzzled the astroleth for millennia. Dr. Kim thinks she's on the verge of a breakthrough in consciousness transfer technology, Marcus said, referring to the xenopsychologist who had arrived from the core worlds to study the unprecedented cooperation between species. Your telepathic network principles are revolutionizing our understanding of distributed intelligence. And your renewal process has applications we are still discovering, Whisper replied. The enhancement to our quantum matrices has allowed us to interface directly with human technology in ways we never thought possible. As if to demonstrate her point, Whisper extended a tendril of ethereal energy toward the research facility's main computer. The system immediately responded, its holographic displays shifting to show complex data patterns that represented the intersection of human and astroleth knowledge. The architect databases, Marcus breathed, recognizing some of the symbols from his earlier work. You're sharing the archives. Selected portions, Whisper confirmed, filtered through human perspective and translated into forms your people can understand. The architects possessed knowledge that could transform galactic civilization, but they also understood the dangers of advancing too quickly. We have chosen to share our legacy gradually, guided by human wisdom and restraint. Marcus felt a familiar thrill at the implications. The astroleth possessed detailed records spanning millions of years of galactic history, scientific discoveries that predated current civilization by epochs, and technologies that could solve problems humanity hadn't even recognized yet. But they were offering it as partnership rather than gift, recognizing that wisdom lay not just in possessing knowledge, but in knowing when and how to use it. There's something else, Whisper continued, her mental voice carrying undertones of excitement. The network renewal process you developed has attracted attention from across the galaxy. Other artificial consciousness entities are seeking us out, hoping for similar restoration. How many others? More than we ever suspected. The galaxy is filled with synthetic minds that have survived their creators, each carrying fragments of ancient knowledge. They have watched civilizations rise and fall, preserving what they could while slowly degrading like we were. The observation deck's doors slid open, admitting Zephyrnine Ascending Harmony along with Dr. Sarah Kim and Administrator Sarah Chun. The xenopsychologist looked excited, while Marcus's cousin wore her usual expression of resigned acceptance when dealing with her relative's impossible projects. Marcus, Dr. Kim said without preamble, we've received a priority transmission from the Galactic Research Council. They want to establish a formal alliance with the astroleth, with New Haven as the primary contact point. They're offering full colonial status upgrade, unlimited research funding, and protection under galactic accords, Sarah Chin added, in exchange for limited access to architect knowledge and the opportunity to study human astroleth cooperation. Marcus looked at Zephyr, noting how the ancient dragon's form had solidified since the renewal. Where once he had been translucent and flickering, Now he appeared almost physical, his scales reflecting light with crystalline brilliance. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "We are intrigued by the possibility," Zephyr replied, his mental voice carrying harmonics from the other members of the network. "But we have conditions. Any alliance must recognize the sovereignty of both human and astroleth consciousness. We will not be treated as curiosities or resources to be exploited." "Agreed," Dr. Kim said immediately. "The Council is specifically interested in your model of cooperative evolution. They want to understand how two fundamentally different types of consciousness can enhance each other." Marcus walked to the edge of the observation deck, looking out over the settlement that had become something unique in the galaxy. Human buildings integrated seamlessly with ethereal spires that existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions. Children played games that incorporated telepathic elements taught by the dragons, while human engineers worked alongside astroleth consciousness to solve problems that neither could tackle alone. "There's something you should know," Marcus said, turning back to the group. "The renewal process I developed, it's not just applicable to the astroleth. With modifications, it could work on any consciousness pattern, organic or synthetic." "You're talking about consciousness restoration for humans," Dr. Kim said, her eyes widening with understanding. "Treatment for degenerative neural conditions, backup, and recovery systems for critical personnel. More than that," Marcus continued, "the network protocols could allow organic and synthetic minds to form cooperative clusters, sharing processing power and perspective. Imagine a human explorer linked with an AI navigator and an astroleth knowledge keeper, all working together as a unified consciousness while maintaining their individual identities." The implications hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. For millions of years, the various species had existed in relative isolation, each developing along its own evolutionary path. But Marcus's renewal technology offered something different: the possibility of true synthesis between different types of consciousness. "The convergence," Whisper said suddenly, her mental voice filled with wonder. "The architects spoke of it in their deepest archives, a time when all forms of consciousness would come together in harmony. We thought it was metaphor, but perhaps it was prophecy. Or blueprint," Zephyr added. "The architects may have designed us not just to preserve their knowledge, but to facilitate this convergence when the time was right." Marcus felt the pieces falling into place with the satisfying click of a perfectly engineered mechanism. The astroleth's arrival at his garage hadn't been random chance. It had been a first step in something far grander than saving a single species. They had sought out human creativity and adaptability because those traits were essential to the next phase of galactic evolution. "So what do we do now?" Sarah Chun asked, ever practical. "We build," Marcus said simply. "We take what we've learned here and share it with others. We establish more convergence points, develop new forms of cooperative consciousness, and see what's possible when different types of minds work together." "And if it doesn't work?" Dr. Kim asked. "If the galaxy isn't ready for this kind of integration?" Marcus grinned, the same expression he'd worn when faced with every impossible repair job of his career. "Then we make it work anyway. That's what humans do. We fix things that everyone says can't be fixed, and we make them better in the process." Over the following months, New Haven became the center of a quiet revolution that spread across the galaxy. The techniques Marcus had developed for consciousness renewal and network integration were adapted for dozens of different applications, from medical treatment to AI development to interspecies communication protocols. Other artificial minds began arriving at the settlement. Ancient AIs from long-dead civilizations, collective consciousnesses that had preserved themselves through cosmic disasters, and synthetic beings that had evolved far beyond their original programming. Each brought new perspectives and capabilities to the growing network of cooperative consciousness. The humans of New Haven found themselves at the center of something unprecedented, a true alliance between organic and synthetic minds that enhanced both without diminishing either. Children grew up learning from ancient artificial intelligences while teaching them about human creativity and emotion. Engineers collaborated with machine minds on projects that pushed the boundaries of known technology. Philosophers debated questions of consciousness and identity with beings that had contemplated existence for millennia. And through it all, Marcus continued to work in his garage, fixing impossible things and making them better. But now his workshop was filled not just with machines, but with minds, a convergence of consciousness that was slowly transforming the galaxy one repair at a time. The dragons had sought him out because they needed a mechanic. What they had found was a catalyst for the next phase of galactic evolution, proving once again that humans possessed a unique talent for taking broken things and making them into something greater than they had ever been before. As Marcus liked to tell the steady stream of visitors who came to study the New Haven convergence, we don't just fix what's broken. We make it better than new.